it's closely related to the standard billing process. And then we can kind of loop back on the standard one if there's any questions. Does that sound like an okay plan of attack there?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes,
All
I
right.
think sounds good.
Perfect. So accounting trade, there we go. All right, so let me share my screen. I'll walk through it first, and then we can review any questions that may come up. Just so we're all clear, a dropship in Business Central is probably very similar to your existing dropship, but it is where we never actually bring inventory into any warehouse or a 3PL, and it's going straight from the vendor to the customer. When the PMs are setting up and creating all those orders and making everything go through, they should do all the work to create that. I'll show a couple of different fields that are indicators that you're using, that you're looking at a dropship versus a standard warehouse transaction. The process on the billing and accounting side will be different. So I want to walk through that. I can send a follow-up with kind of the step-by-steps for a standard dropship invoicing process. The key thing that we have on that is on all sales orders and purchase orders, there's always a location code. So I'll start from a sales order. If the location code is dropship, then that is your indication that it is a dropship order. So on your sales order list page, you should have a dropship location code. You could create a filter, just like we did last time. My filter would be location code, then dropship. And I could save that. If I'm looking at my salesperson codes, we didn't specify when we did those salesperson filters, we didn't specify a location code. So we actually can add a second filter. So if I'm working on this list, and then I could come in and say, I want to look at only my dropship orders. This gives me kind of my indication of all of my outstanding dropship orders. But mostly, the way the process is going to go is the PMs are going to create all the documents and the information and send it all to the vendor. And really what's going to be the next trigger is the vendor's going to send an invoice that says, hey, here's what I shipped. And that's going to be either it's a shipping notice or it's an invoice, probably together, but maybe not always. But the key thing for us to know is we get a notification from the vendor that the product has been shipped to the customer. Somewhere in that document, I would hope they would reference a purchase order or a sales order. Most likely from the vendor side, it's going to just be the PO number. We just talked about getting that customer sales order number back to the vendor. But I would say most of the time when your vendor bills you, they're going to say, yep, you sent me a PO number 61. Oh, that's probably a bad example. Let's do 128. Sorry, this is the sales side. Let me flip to purchase orders. I went to the wrong side. They're going to say, you sent me PO number 10. Here is your invoice for PO number 10. So that's what I'm going to start with as kind of our jumping off point on the billing side is we get an invoice from the vendor that says, I shipped this to your customer. I'm actually going to grab this one here because it's probably a better example. Okay, so my first step is I can search that PO number. So if I get the invoice and it's 00016, I can search up here and that tells me my PO number. I'm going to go ahead and open up this purchase order. So this should match my vendor that says, yep, SNS Activewear sent me an invoice for PO 16. With a dropship, we have to do the process in a specific order. And I'll show what that looks like. We actually start from the sales order because we're going to bill our customer first, and then we're going to accept the vendor invoice. But from what I understand, that's going to all be done by this group on the accounting side. If there's questions about that, let me walk through it and then we can decide if that is going to be done differently. But that was my understanding that this group would be doing both. So my first step is I find my PO that the invoice came in from. Okay. Then I'm going to come down and I'm going to find in my purchase order, I need to find what the sales order number is that's related to this purchase order. If I've got I might have a your reference number in here. I'll expand this to show this your reference field will have that customer PO number. So that may be a way to do it, but there is a built-in way within BC that's going to be the easiest, I think. And that is to come into order. So in your lines menu, order, drop shipment, sales order. I'll put this in my little notes that I'll follow up. So it's lines menu, order, drop shipment, sales order. And what that's going to do is it's going to take me directly to the sales order that's linked to this purchase order. And of course, the one I chose is not set up correctly. So let's grab one that is. Let's find a more recent one. Drop ship. All right. I can use Lisa's for MSY. Yeah. So I clicked on that and it took me into my sales order. So this is now my customer facing document to Pokemon Company International. And they ordered this item and 1,000 of them. Okay, so I have found my relevant sales order. On my invoice, it should show how many they shipped to my customer. We're going to assume that they shipped it in full, but we can do partials, and I'll show that in a second. So if I got my information from my vendor, I'm going to go ahead and come into my sales order and just reload. I don't know why it's not letting me edit it. We don't have any restrictions on editing sales orders and permissions. I'll make a note to look at that. Honey, if you don't mind, just also if you get a second to see why it would not allow editing. I don't know why. Okay, but so I have my item list. There's lots of items, that's fine. Basically, my job on the billing side is I'm going to come in here and say, what am I going to bill my customer for? In this case, when we set it up, we didn't do it right. So I'm going to just go ahead and put a price in there. That should be filled out before it comes to you guys. If it doesn't, then you go back to whoever created it, in this case, Lisa, and say, hey, Lisa, this sales order did not get created correctly. Can you fix it? Let me go ahead and go back to my release status. So now I'm in and everything's correct. My invoice from my vendor says 1,000. It's going to be a different price, right? They're going to bill, the vendor's going to bill us what they charge us. This is the customer billing. So I'm going to charge my customer $15 each. So this is going to be a $15,000 invoice. So you can see this kind of combines both sides, both the customer and the vendor side. What I'm going to do is verify my quantity in here. If they did a partial, I can override this to 800. But in this case, for this one, we'll just keep it at the full 1,000. This is my key field here, my quantity to ship and my quantity to invoice. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in finger quotes, ship this product to my customer and invoice them. If everything looks good on my dates and I don't have any issues with my due dates, ideally you have a PO from your customer in here that they gave you. Got my salesperson assigned. Everything looks good. All I have to do is verify my quantity and post.
Hey, Matt, I had a question.
Mhm.
So, like, what if for like Pokemon, for example, some of their orders get shipped like to the US or the UK? Like, where would we like change the ship to address?
So
Well, I guess Pokemon's kind of a bad example because they're tax exempt no matter where it ships to. But I mean, like some of the billing that I have, 500 of this item could be shipped to some like Renton in Washington. So we would need to tax that differently than, if it shipped to, Idaho or something like that.
right. Yeah, so we should have a separate sales order for each address because we have to have a separate
Oh,
sales order for tax calculations to work.
So there's no split ship option on the orders because
awesome.
that's something we currently have going on in DB. We'll have one order, but it'll split ship and it'll ship to multiple locations and calculate the tax. So
Yeah, so it does, but the way it calculates it is it just creates individual sales orders for each one. Now,
okay.
when we do the summarized bill to the customer, they're just going to see the total, right? They don't know that there's maybe 100 individual orders underneath it. They're just going to get billed for the total amount.
Well, this wouldn't be a summary bill. This would be one order, not summary bill customer, and we still have the option in our current system to be able to create one order and have multiple ship twos. And it's usually labeled like a split ship option, but that's also fine if we have to do individual orders per ship to. I guess we would just have to note maybe if we got one vendor invoice that this needs to be applied to the following orders, this one and this one and this one. So it
Yeah.
wouldn't just be for one. Okay.
So it would be separate. So
Mhm.
in the case of Pokemon, where you have different tax jurisdictions, international versus not, non-tax versus not, that all should be set up correctly on the sales order side based on the kind of the creation of that the PMs are doing. So then
Oh,
there would
wow.
be individual
Okay.
ones. If you wanted to verify it, this would say, yep, I'm just shipping to, in this case, just the default customer sell to address. We didn't put a separate ship to address.
Okay. Alrighty. Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
The other question I have on this is, you were invoicing, the $15,000 here. How does it know what to charge for freight here? Because, let's say that the freight was $100 from the vendor, and we're going to mark that up 10%. How does it know what the freight is?
We won't know that until we get the invoice, right? Because we're going to pay
Right.
actual, not estimated.
Right.
So if we have a freight line that we need to add, we come in. Oh, it's already in open status. And I would just, as the biller, I would come in and add my freight line that I'm going to bill my customer for. I will also add it on the PO because I'm going to get charged the same thing from my vendor. To add a freight line, we are using what's called a resource. Come on. So this would be considered.
Hey, Matt, I was able to refresh, but I got the same error, but then now it works for me. So it should be open.
Okay. So I should put in my freight one and whatever I am charging the customer. So let's say it's a $50 freight charge, and that's my markup after I'm done. So that's what the process would be to add a freight line is reopen the order, add your line, and then re-release it.
So in the case of the inbound freight's $100, right? If we automatically mark up that freight 10%,
Just the freight.
Yeah, just the freight. How does it know to do that?
So we are working on, that's going to be warehouse specific, not on drop ships.
Because we have, and I'm assuming K Smith has as well, we have customers where we mark up all of their freight 10%, no matter whether it's a warehouse or whether it's a drop ship, direct ship. We also have some customers where maybe we mark it up 10% of stuff coming out of the warehouse, but we mark it up 12% on direct ships.
So on the warehouse side, we have a solution in place for that. That one I can show. We basically set what that markup is by customer, and I can show that when we do a
But on a
warehouse
drop
shipping.
ship order,
But on
like
drop ship,
on a drop ship order like this,
Yep.
we're looking at a vendor invoice, and it tells us that the freight's $100.
yeah. So right now we don't have a tool for that. So right now we would take the 100 and say it's a 12% markup. So my price is gonna be 112, and I can do 100 times 1.12 if I wanted to do the math in the cell. So right now we will just have to manually put that in. That will be something we can have for the Smart Source go live, but we don't have for K-Smith.
Okay.
So on the billing team, the team that's filling this out, do you know your markup percentages if it's applicable when you're billing freight to your customers?
Not on the SmartBook side. Mm-mm. I don't know about Logic currently, what they do for freight, but I mean, for SmartBooks, billing wise, we have no idea like what the markup is going to be on freight.
Is that because it's already set up in SmartBook, or
Honestly, I don't know. I think that's what sales puts in. Like we don't like I mean we check the the gross margin and stuff to make sure that it's within like the correct above 20%. But I mean as far as like what they're charging for freight or even the products, like we don't know that. Like accounting's pretty left in the dark when it comes to that.
Yeah, currently we don't mark up freight, so it's whatever the vendor charged us. We don't, I know we're going forward. I talked to Tom and he wants us to start doing that, but they have the option if they want to or not, because now it's commissionable. It wasn't before.
so before you just did dollar for dollar?
Yes. And it wasn't commissionable anyway. It wasn't commissionable either. So as long as they accounted for the charge, and usually they just sold it whatever the freight charge was, whatever it said on the vendor invoice. They never marked it up. So it's whatever, Caitlin's right, it's whatever the PM put in, and we just verify that to the invoice and then we bill it, as long as they're accounting for all the freight charges.
Okay.
But we're fine. I mean, it's gonna change, right? Because you guys pay commission on freight, I heard.
Yes, freight is commissionable.
Okay. So I think we're changing that in September, because I changed it to make it let's say, because right now it wasn't commissionable in SmartBook, but I changed it to where it would be. So when we start paying commission on the September orders, we would include that. But a lot of the salespeople don't, so it's gonna hurt their margin if they don't mark it up, because it's gonna go against their cost.
Yeah, if they're bearing the freight. Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So whatever the business policy is on that, we'll kind of let you guys hash that out. Basically, if you're doing a straight pass through, you can update the price with whatever the vendor charged you. If you're marking it up, it's pretty easy to do it right in that cell like I showed, or just type in the price that you're going to charge your customer. Anything else that any scenarios you can think of where, I mean, this will, if tax were set up, this would be calculating tax, so you can verify the tax is calculating correctly. It should all do that automatically. All we have to do is just take a glance and be like, yep, that looks great, and move on. Yeah, so basically your job in here is to update freight if possible, if applicable. Add freight. And then we're ready to post. Okay, by posting, it's going to create a invoice for this customer for this amount and put it on their account. This one is set to terms, so it's going to be due right then, or due in 30 days. Okay, so I'll go ahead and post this just so we can see. And when I post it, I'm going to choose ship and invoice because I'm acknowledging that I had this product shipped to the customer, and I'm also going to create my invoice. I'm going to do it all at once. It's going to go through and calculate all my stuff, look at tax, do all the work, and when I'm done, I get a posted sales invoice. This I can send manually to my customer by email, and it'll have it attached with the individual lines. Or if it's part of a summary bill, then it would just get accumulated, and when we do the summary bill at the end of the period, we'll include it. We are going to put a field on the customer that will also flow all the way through, so that on this sales invoice, you'll be able to see if this is a summary bill customer. So you don't have to remember if you need to send it manually or not. It will have a field similar to this closed that'll say summary bill, yes or no. And if it's summary bill, then you don't send it. If it's not, up to you, kind of based on your experience with the customer, but most likely I would imagine you're going to send it to them. Okay. So that is the sales side. Any questions on creating those sales invoices? Okay, so now I'm ready, and this is where the order comes in. I have to ship my sales order before I can create my vendor invoice on the purchase order. So now I'm going to go back into my purchase order that I was looking at. And of course, I don't, let's see if I can find which one that was. Oh, I should have a, yeah, great. It was PO 119. Again, if I had my vendor invoice in front of me, I would have that reference. But the other option is, and this is going back to what we talked about when we were doing standard warehouse invoicing, my received not invoiced filter still works for drop ships once I've posted that shipment. And I'll show you what that looks like. As soon as I post that shipment, the system goes into my purchase order. If I look at my quantities over here, my quantity received has already been posted. So the system said, hey, you shipped this to the customer. I'm going to mark it as received, meaning we've already received the inventory. Now all you have to do is invoice. So your POs, once you post that sales invoice, are going to show up in that same received not invoiced bucket that basically shows, hey, this is stuff that's outstanding to be invoiced. Gonna put in my vendor invoice number. They told me what the invoice was. I've got my document date. This is how we calculate the terms. So this is whatever the invoice date is on their invoice. If they gave me a shipment number, I can put it in here. If they sent like an advanced shipment notice or some sort of shipping notification, I could say, oh, yep, that was a shipment and whatever number they gave me. That's just informational. It is not required, but it is helpful sometimes for record keeping. And then I'm going to, because in this case, I got a bill for $100 in freight, I'm going to reopen my purchase order so I can add in my resource. Let me rephrase that. We are going to use my charge item. Okay, so I'm going to make a note of this, but on the purchase side, so on the sales side, which we did earlier, I use a resource outbound freight because all I care about is just billing my customer for that amount. On the purchase order side, I'm going to use a charge item. So instead of an item, it's a charge item. And I'm going to use inbound freight. And the reason why is I want to apply that cost to the cost of those items. You notice that it moved me out of it moved me to the next PO. When I'm in a filtered list and I change the status of the order that I was in, it automatically moves me to the next one. So let me just go back into my 119. Okay, so here's my item charge freight. Again, my quantity is going to be 1. My amount is going to be the $100 that they're charging me for freight. Because it's a charge item, I have one more step to do. If I tried to post it, it's going to yell at me because I have this big red 0. This is kind of something we talked about before. If we know what the charge is beforehand, the PMs are going to add this in and take care of this. If it just shows up on the invoice, someone has to do this. It's a question of who. We can talk through those steps, but basically all I have to do is say, hey, I got charged $100 in freight. How do I want to assign that freight? I can just click on the 0. Shows, yep, here's all my items that this came in. I'm just going to suggest it, which says, yep, put all $100 on these items. And I can hit close. So it's 2 clicks. And my red 0 went to a 1, meaning I'm good. Basically what it's going to do is it's going to put 10 cents of freight charge on each of the 1,000 items that we just received. I'm going to make my notes over here. So add a freight line, and that is a charge item, inbound freight. Quantity.
So if we know from the PM CSR side that we're going to have a freight charge from the vendor, they should be adding it to the order in advance.
Yes.
Okay.
And we have that set up with on the customer item job cards.
Okay.
I don't know how often that we don't know in advance, and so we just wait for the vendor to invoice us, and then we just put it on the invoice. That's kind of the scenario here, is that you just know the vendor's going to charge your freight, and then you add it in once you get the invoice.
So you don't verify with the PM, like, don't they get like some kind of quote of what the freight is? Cause sometimes the vendor bills us more. Like I had one where they billed us like $389. And when I questioned it, because they said that we needed a revised invoice, and she told me don't pay it because it was only supposed to be like $30 or something. So, but I mean, for Kimberly, do you guys just pay what's on the invoice, or how do you guys handle freight charges?
So currently in our system, we don't have an actual freight line that we add. In this new system, they will be adding a freight line. They can try to get an estimate of freight cost, but typically most CSRs don't know what the freight cost is going to be. So as long as there's a freight line added at the time of entering the invoice, which we typically do the processing of the vendor invoice first and then do the billing so that we can have a little bit more control over the cost and making sure that the sale is profitable. So for example, the one that you had where they overbilled for the freight, we would still go ahead and post the vendor invoice that we've received. We would keep the order open and add a credit line to the order, waiting for a vendor credit for the difference. Because ultimately, if they've charged us $300 and something, but they were only supposed to charge us 30, they should be sending us a vendor credit. So the order wouldn't technically be ready to bill. You would still post the vendor invoice, but you would keep it open, waiting for a second vendor invoice for credit on that amount.
But how about when you bill the client, like on the sales order, because we would have already entered in, on
Yeah,
the first
if it's a
part, so we
markup,
would have,
yep.
yeah, we would have invoiced whatever. I guess that would have been, wouldn't we have marked it up and then entered it in there and then overbilled the client for the freight as well?
No, well, and that's why I kind of went back to Matt did it in kind of the reverse of how we do it. We typically don't bill the sales order and then post the cost. We wait to post the cost. And at the time, like they have this column to the right that has notes. At the time of posting the vendor invoice, if the cost is higher than expected, then we would note it and say like, hey, CSR, hey, sales rep, they billed us $389 for freight. Do you want to sell that, or did they bill us wrong? Then they would review it, add a note back, and then again, we would just kind of keep going until the issue is resolved before we actually bill it. So you wouldn't overbill the customer. You would question it for sure if it was higher than the quoted amount that they had set up on the line. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does, but like what you said, it looks like the way we do it in BC is we're doing it backwards. We're doing the sales order before the purchase order. So didn't we already email the client the invoice?
Yeah.
So they would have been overcharged, and then now they're not gonna pay probably. And then,
So yeah, you would just create a customer credit memo for the difference.
Right, which would create more work. That's the reason why we do step one is posting the vendor invoice and then step two. So to avoid the extra work, you wouldn't do it in this order. You would do the posting of the invoice first, and then you would bill the sales order.
yeah, that's how we do it currently too. So this is, so is there a reason, Matt, on why BC you do it the opposite? Seems really odd.
Yeah, there's there's a lot of kind of back end work that's going on of linking those two documents together. But yeah, it's not something we can really change because it touches like the whole system. So we do have to do it sales order first, then purchase order.
Okay.
I mean, you're not going to bill that customer until you have that invoice in your hands. Ideally, at that point, you're having some sort of a double check on like, oh, that seems like a lot for freight, or I mean, like you're not going to actually go and create that sales order and bill the client if you have that invoice and you're like $389 for freight. That seems really high. You would stop long before the process of actually billing the customer.
Okay.
But Matt, in the case of, I've got a sales order, 2 lines on it. One for vendor A, the second line for vendor B. Vendor A is really good and gets us our invoice really quick. Timely manner. Vendor B drags their feet and we don't get it for 2 weeks. But we need to really pay vendor A.
So we won't be able to do 2 vendors in the same purchase order because a purchase order is going to be vendor specific.
But you're
On the
telling us that we have to invoice the sales order first.
Yep.
So, but we don't know what the freight is from both vendor invoices.
And you would bill, you don't want to bill the customer for 1 versus 2. You want to bill all at the same time on the customer side.
we would tend to bill both together. Yes.
So this is a customer ordering items from two separate vendors that are both being drop shipped to their location. It's one sales order, multiple
Mhm.
vendors.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
And you want to invoice. I mean, in your current system, you wouldn't be able to bill the customer until both come in anyway, right?
Correct.
Yeah, in
So
our
it'd be
current
the
system,
same here.
we apply the vendor cost first, then we invoice the customer.
You don't have to have like shots, like 2 shots or.
Yeah, so we would have to wait till we got all the vendor invoices to pay them. Right?
Yeah.
Because right now, as we get the invoice, like, we might have 2 vendors on an order, like the t-shirts and the embroidery. So as we get the invoice, if it matches to the PO, we'll pay it. And then we usually get the embroidery invoice, like what Steve said, 2 weeks later, and then we pay them. We don't, but in this case, we couldn't pay for the t-shirts until we got the embroidery invoice. Is that how normally it works? Because if we have to do the sales order first before we can enter the vendor invoice.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, we can't bill the customer until we know the true cost of everything. We're not going to bill one without the other.
Yeah, but we
On the customer or the
normally
vendor side.
pay the vendor as we get the invoice though. So basically we would have to hold up the invoices until we received all the vendor invoices.
Yes.
'Cause yeah, I don't.
That's,
I don't know if that's what is being done here though, right? Because if this is a purchase order, so we have one purchase order and we have multiple vendors, that would technically be one sales order, multiple POs, right?
Mhm.
So we could technically post cost to one of the POs without actually billing it. So we could technically get it into AP so that it could be paid, but still keep the order open because there's a second portion of that sales order that technically is waiting for a piece.
not from what Matt's
So-
saying.
So
Right,
Okay,
Matt?
so
the way we solve that is on the sales order side, we're
mhm,
going to ship, not invoice.
75?
okay.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
I get paid tomorrow, so I'll.
let me, Jill, you've got kind of some background noise there. Oh, great. We got a ton of Pokemon ones. This is great. Let's open up another one, 153. So if it's a drop ship and I get noticed that it's been shipped, but I don't know my second vendor, so I don't want to finalize my customer sales invoice, I'll come in and say, yep, here's my quantity on the first one. This one doesn't have 2 lines, but I can post just the shipment, not the invoice. So then I come into post. I'm just going to ship. I hope it lets me. And I do not have a customer invoice yet. It is to be invoiced, but I have shipped this. Now, if I go to my related purchase order, because I've shipped it, I now have a receipt.
Which then allows us to post the vendor invoice for the apparel.
For the part that we
Until-
have done, the other part just sits open. Yep.
That
Once I have
works.
all of my invoices in from all my vendors, then I can go back to my sales order and post the invoice and send it to them.
That would work because then that allows us to get the vendor paid, allows us to take advantage of the discounts.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's what I was
that'll work.
thinking. It
Yeah.
just takes a couple of steps, but it's an option, it's a possibility. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great.
Sorry, I just needed to walk through like what that scenario was before I understood what we were trying to accomplish. But yes, so the situation
Yeah,
is you would
and-
ship,
and-
not invoice.
Yeah, exactly. And that's ultimately what ends up happening is some things are coupled together or kitted together, and so we want to make sure that we can continue to flow through the business as stuff comes in, but still make sure that our billing is accurate and making sure we're capturing all the costs. So that's great.
All right.
And by shipping the, sorry, by shipping the sales order, what you just did, that doesn't, you said that doesn't create any type of invoice, right, to the client? It's just for like internal purposes until we, get all the vendor bills.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So if I were to come in here and look at invoices for this sales order, it's going to be blank. There's not any invoices related to this order. But I have a number of, all right, I do have a shipment, meaning I've logged that something went out the door. I'm still waiting to finish the invoicing process.
Oh, cool. And this is what we're talking about. This is only drop shipments, correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so let me just make a note here in my notes. If multiple vendors in one shipment, the other option is if the vendor partially ships. They're like, hey, I want to ship the first one, but I'm not going to ship the second one because we're a week out. And you want to let them go ahead and do that. And then you'll bill the rest of the order when that second shipment comes through from the vendor. We could do the exact same thing. We would just ship what they said they shipped in the first one on the sales order side. So I would do a partial. Again, ship, not invoice. Then when everything comes in and I'm fully confident, then I go ahead and send my bill to my customer for that. So that's also an option. I don't know why. I mean, ideally on a dropship, you probably say ship complete, but that also is the same functionality. Any other questions on drop shipments?
To go back to what Jill had mentioned about them overbilling us for freight, is there an item code like labeled like credit? So if we did get a vendor credit that came into the order, that could be added. I just didn't see it as an option where you were but it could have been there. I just didn't see it. So
yeah, so we don't really do a credit with. We have to do it as a credit memo.
okay, but not crediting our customer. I'm just saying a credit for cost on an order. Like, is that an option?
Explain that again. Sorry.
So if a vendor billed us incorrectly, we posted the cost of the order, but the sales rep goes back to the vendor and say, hey, you overbilled us for freight. Give us a credit of $320 for freight. How do you add a credit line on the order for that credit cost? It's not going to be carried over to this customer. It's only buried credit cost.
Right. So then you would do it as a purchase credit memo. So we can't do like a negative value in an invoice line or a PO line. We better to just do a credit memo. You can copy from your existing document. So you can reference back to the original one and apply it automatically. So it'll automatically say, hey, this vendor billed me for X amount. I want to apply a $20 discount on that or a $200 discount or whatever. And that'll apply so that when we go to make the payment, it's the correct amount with the credit rather than the full. Okay. I can show an example of that if you want. That'd be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me find that posted purchase invoice. Where was my? Oh, maybe I didn't post that one. Yeah, I have not posted it yet. MIS promotions. Yeah. Okay. So I'm about to post my $100 freight charge. So let me go ahead and finish that so that I can finish that up. When I have a item charge, let me back up a second. So going all the way back to where we were before we jumped into kind of the exceptions there, this was my freight charge from my customer, my $100. I had to apply it. I had to assign it to the items that have been received. Now I have a quantity to receive and a quantity to invoice for this line. So when I go to post this, I have to receive an invoice. Otherwise, it's going to create two invoices, one for the items and one for the freight. And I want to consolidate everything into one. So I have to receive my freight and then invoice everything. So let me go ahead and post that. Then I can use this So I'm going to not open it because we'll look at it here in a second. So 21 now is my vendor invoice. I go back to them and say, hey, you charged me too much for freight. I need a credit. They say, okay, yeah, here's your credit for $80 on freight. I can come in and I can, so I'm going to copy this invoice number. Right, so PPI 21. I'm going to go into my vendor card because this is really my starting point. Find my MYS promotions. New document, purchase credit memo. As soon as I click here, it's going to assign and grab all the vendor information. I'm going to say this is a credit, PPI, I forget what the number was, great. And then I can come in here to prepare, and I can say get posted document lines to reverse. So this is where the key is that I can come in and say, okay, I want to look at all my posted invoices. Here's the invoice that they sent me. I'm going to just select this freight line because I'm not getting a credit on my item. I'm just getting it on the freight. So I'm going to click here. My blue square highlights it. It now references and said, yep, that was invoice number 21. My freight, my credit amount is $80. All I have to do is click that. It then auto applies to my invoice and I can post my credit memo. All right, we are missing a setup because we have not posted purchase credit memo accounts before. Honey, are you still
Okay.
on?
Yep, I'm right here.
Do you
Yeah,
mind
that's a lot easier.
grabbing that?
Yeah.
Right, that's so, and the idea behind it is you now have a separate document that shows, hey, they billed us this amount. Here's the credit that they gave us. It's going to apply both of them. The outstanding amount due is going to be the $80 less.
Okay.
And having
Thank
that
you.
little get posted document lines to reverse is such a nice little tool to be able to.
And just please show them on the posted purchase invoices not to use the correct button.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
So there are shiny objects that Microsoft likes to release. And it's some dumb developer somewhere sitting and he's like, oh, I'll give you guys a shortcut of how to reverse it. But if there's like 3 steps to reverse it, the button only does the first, or it only goes the first step and a half. And then you have to remember to do the second half of the step yourself. So don't do that, but what Matt's about to show, do it the way he just showed you, please. And it's the better way. You guys will learn one efficient practice, and that should be the same way everybody at Corporate Smart Source and K-Smith should you run the company. Right? Should all be homogeneous.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
okay. I know we're right up at our time. And we have another call that I have to jump to. I'm happy to walk through more examples of this if there's any questions. Like I said, I've got some quick little notes that I have taken of kind of that process. I will send them out to this group of how to post and manage a drop ship.
So it
Feel
sounds like
free-
we
go
should
ahead.
keep this meeting series going for at least another week or so. Does that sound about right? To kind of get everyone in a good position?
I'm okay with that. I think that sounds good to me.
All right, I'll
Sure.
get it taken care of.
Awesome. All right.
Thanks, you guys.
everyone.
All right, thanks
All
everyone.
right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.